Our next author, already accused of being a physicist, is Roger Reid.
Actually, I may be the only author that I know that travels frequently with a tap dancing astrophysicist.
Not me.
It's not Les. But it does turn out that Les knows my friend Mitzi Adams, who is one of the people at NASA who vetted the book for me, Space, which is my novel. And so it is NASA's fault if there is anything wrong with the book. I just want y'all to know that, if the facts are not exactly correct. I do want to say, before I get started, really, Cody, I think all of us are interested in how that story of Larry Langford's going to end. A few years ago, I have the great good fortune to work on the Discovering Alabama Public Television series. It's produced by the University of Alabama, the Alabama Museum of Natural History. And I've worked with Dr. Phillips on the program as a co-writer and producer for since '96 now. And we get to go to all these places in Alabama that, I hope you've seen the show. Doug's always out there hiking the trails with his dog or canoeing the rivers. And, I'm in the role of being on the other side of the camera. But we live in an incredibly fascinating place, right here on planet Earth. And it occurred to me when my kids were in the 6th, 7th grade that there wasn't anything that they were reading that was set in that world that I was working in. There was a lot of fascinating stuff out there, a lot of really good books. My daughter loves the Harry Potter books, for example. I think she's into Twilight now. But there wasn't anything that, where you could go out and touch the stuff that you read about in the book. And so I wrote a book set in the Longleaf forest called Longleaf, which is our state tree, and set in South Alabama. And I made a serious mistake in writing this book. I had this main character as a 14-year-old boy, but then I put a 15-year-old girl in there with him. And people would say, you've got to write another book about that girl. And I got to tell you, I can remember a little bit about being a 14-year-old boy. I remember nothing about being a 15-year-old girl. And when Emily turned 15, I realized I knew even less than I thought I did. So the next book, Space, I decided I would make Jason Caldwell as my main character. I made the second character so obnoxious that I'm hoping nobody will ever want another book about him. Let me read a chapter here quickly from Space. This is chapter 2. It's called The Astronomers Club. It started last Monday because I had to go with my dad to his annual meeting of the Space Cadets. I'm not making it up. When I was a little kid, I used to think it was a great name for a club of astronomers. That was before I realized Space Cadet was just another way of saying nerd. The Space Cadets, and there are 6 of them now, had all been in college together. All of them had studied physics and astronomy, and they formed this group while they were still in school. After graduation, they went their separate ways and agreed to get together a few days during the second week of June each year, and which is not the best time of year for astronomy, but the best time of year for them to get together, because like my dad, many of them are teachers. Every one of us thought we would have unraveled the mysteries of the universe by now, but the universe turned out to be a lot more mysterious than we thought, said my dad. I always imagined going with my dad to investigate universal mysteries. I begged to go every year and was always told, no kids allowed. That is until last year. Last year my dad invited me to go along even before I asked. I thought it was because he no longer considered me a kid. I should have known better. And I did know better not long after I was introduced to Stephen A. Warrensburg. Last year, about 6 months before the Space Cadets annual reunion, Stephen and his father were in a car wreck. Stephen was paralyzed from the waist down. You wanted to have compassion for the guy, except for one thing. Stephen A. Warrensburg was and is the most obnoxious, self-inflating know-it-all I've ever met. Stephen is 2 years older than I am, and it became obvious soon after we got to last year's meeting, that I was there to keep him company. I was not along to share my theories of the universe with the Space Cadets. I was there to keep Stephen from getting bored. I was the babysitter for a guy 2 years older than I was. His mom and dad were both space cadets, and after the car wreck, his mom said she didn't think she could leave him with the grandparents anymore. She said the grandparents couldn't take care of a child in a wheelchair. My bet is the grandparents wouldn't let him in their house. Stephen A. Warrensburg had a personality that even his mother had a hard time loving. I saw that for myself a few times during last year's trip. This year, when my dad invited me to go along for the 20th anniversary of the Space Cadets gatherings, I said, no thanks. No, said my dad, you begged to come for years. Is Stephen Warrensburg going to be there, I asked. He is, said my dad. Oh, I said, oh, said my dad. I don't suppose there's anything I could do to make you change your mind. Is there any way I can bribe you? And that's how I got my new iPod. And that's how I found myself on the way to Alabama. Yeah, you heard right, Alabama. Angie Warrensburg, Stephen's mom, works for NASA, and it was her turn to pick the location. She picked Huntsville, Alabama, her home, and the home of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. The last time I was in Alabama, 3 guys tried to kill me. I wasn't so sure a week in Huntsville with Stephen Warrensburg would be any easier. I was right.